They said it was nothing personal as my screen went dark after 15 years of late nights, crisis calls, and code patches no one else could fix. I watched the young COO smile through his polished speech, using words like efficiency and innovation, while quietly erasing the woman who built the ground he stood on. He thought ending the call ended my story, but the system we built together still had one heartbeat, and it only listened to me. Before I continue my story, hit subscribe if you've ever been replaced by someone who didn't understand your worth. He didn't even look nervous when he said it. "We're streamlining," Mark announced, his voice smooth and hollow, the kind people use when they've already rehearsed your removal. My name was still on the Zoom screen, a small square in the corner, while he talked about efficiency and new leadership energy. I'd been awake for 30 hours straight, fixing the deployment pipeline he was bragging about, but there he was, thanking his agile transition team while pretending not to see me. Then, like it was an afterthought, he turned to HR and said quietly, "Make sure she doesn't touch production again." He thought his mic was muted. It wasn't. For a moment, the call froze. Dozens of icons stared back, muted faces, uncertain smiles collapsing into guilt. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, 15 years reduced to one careless sentence. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just sat there, listening to the static hum of the meeting, realizing I was being erased by a man who still couldn't tell a rollback from a reboot. When HR finally spoke, her voice shook. "We'll handle this offline." I muted myself, leaned back, and let the silence stretch until it hurt. It wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated, but it would be the last time someone mistook my quiet for weakness. He didn't know it yet, but the system he was so proud of still had one instruction: it would only obey from me. When I first joined Helix Analytics, it was nothing more than a rented office above a print shop and a handful of engineers who believed in doing things the right way. We stayed up through thunderstorms and coffee shortages, keeping the servers alive with nothing but faith and stubborn pride. Back then, when something broke, we fixed it together. No one talked about scaling fast or optimization. We just worked until it worked. But the company grew, and with growth came suits and slogans. The new hires arrived with shiny laptops and louder words, all convinced they were saving us from ourselves. They filled whiteboards with arrows and buzzwords, talking about velocity and alignment. But when the lights flickered at 3 a.m., it was still my phone that rang. I watched Mark walk into that culture like he'd invented it. 33, confident, always smiling, with teeth that cost more than my first car. He called me our legacy asset. Everyone laughed. I didn't. He liked to make jokes about experience being a comfort zone. I like to remind him comfort is what keeps systems stable. He stopped inviting me to meetings after that. Still, I kept doing my job. I fixed what broke, documented everything, and taught younger staff how to avoid the mistakes no one ever writes down. Some listened. Most didn't. They said my methods were slow, my thinking outdated, but I'd been through too many crashes to trust their speed. When you've lived through one failure that almost erased everything, you start designing for survival, not applause. So I did what I've always done. I made sure there was a plan B, a backup, a line of defense no one else needed to know about. I didn't build it out of spite. I built it out of habit, the kind that comes from being burned before. I still remember the night an executive ignored my warnings and pushed an update that crashed every client dashboard across the country. He blamed the engineers. I took the hit, fixed it, and went home knowing I would never let that happen again. After that, I learned to build systems that knew how to protect themselves. Mark liked to say progress meant moving fast and breaking things, but what he never understood was that breaking things has a cost, and I was the one who had always paid it. The longer I stayed, the more invisible I became. My ideas were too cautious, my questions too defensive. When he replaced my process checklist with a colorful flowchart from a consultant, I almost laughed. The flowchart looked good in meetings. It just didn't work in real life. I watched him mistake performance for progress, and I knew, sooner or later, his kind of leadership always meets gravity. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. And somewhere deep down, I began preparing for the day the system would stop pretending to listen to him. There's a certain calm that comes after betrayal, like the still air right before a storm hits. That's where I lived for weeks after the Zoom meeting. I went to work, kept my voice even, smiled when spoken to, and carried the quiet knowledge that my time there was ending. I didn't tell anyone. Not my team, not even the few who still looked up to me. I just started cleaning my desk one drawer at a time, taking home old notebooks, half-dead pens, and the small ceramic owl my daughter made me years ago. Each thing I packed felt like closing a door, but inside, a small ember of defiance burned. They thought they were replacing me with automation and ambition, but they didn't understand how deeply human this system still was. Every safeguard, every line of defense was written by someone who cared, me. They saw it as control. I saw it as care. I built those systems like people build houses for storms, quietly, patiently, never expecting applause, just hoping they'd hold when it mattered. Late one night, sitting in the office alone, I stared at the glow of the monitors and whispered to no one, "You'll be fine without me, won't you?" But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. The heartbeat of the system, that silent pulse that kept everything in sync, was linked to my presence. It wasn't vanity. It was precaution. Years ago, after one of the worst outages in company history, I'd added a protocol to make sure no one could push a release without the original safety check. It was like a smoke alarm wired to the soul of the building. If something or someone went missing, it would freeze everything until verified. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It was just meant to prevent disaster. I called it a continuity safeguard, but to me, it was peace of mind. Nobody ever asked about it. They were too busy talking about the future to notice who built the past. I sometimes wondered if I should tell someone, document it, hand it over. But I knew how they'd twist it. They'd call it outdated, unnecessary, or overly cautious. So I left it buried where it belonged, in the quiet spaces of the system no one paid attention to. On my last Friday before the final HR meeting, I stayed late. The building was empty, except for the hum of machines and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the black glass of my monitor, and for a moment I felt old. Not in years, but in the way experience makes you heavy. I remembered the younger version of me, the one who believed effort was enough to be safe. She was gone now. What replaced her was someone who understood that protection sometimes means letting go. I shut down the console, gathered my things, and left my keycard on the desk. Outside, the parking lot was quiet, slick with rain. As I opened my car door, I hesitated. There was one small thing I hadn't done yet, a final keystroke I'd avoided for years because I never thought I'd need it. My hand hovered over the power button of my laptop, my breath catching for a second. Then I exhaled slowly. Not yet, I thought. There's still a little time before they realize what they've broken. The day they fired me, the sun was too bright, the kind of morning that makes you think everything's fine right up until it isn't. I logged into the meeting early, coffee in hand, hoping maybe this was just another performance review, another polite shuffle of titles. But when the HR icon appeared beside Mark's name, I felt my stomach drop. He smiled the way people do when they've already rehearsed your part in the story. "We're moving in a new direction," he said, every word carefully shaped to sound reasonable. Behind him, a wall of awards gleamed like armor. I stayed quiet. Then he leaned toward his mic and muttered to someone off screen, "Make sure she doesn't touch production again." His tone was soft, careless, like I was a button to be turned off. He thought no one heard him. But he was wrong. A few faces flickered in their boxes. Someone's eyes widened. Another froze mid-nod. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept my face still. I'd learned a long time ago that silence can be louder than outrage. The HR manager cleared her throat, fumbling through her script about organizational realignment. I thanked them for their time, even as my hands trembled just out of frame. When the call ended, I stared at the blank screen for a long minute, listening to the faint echo of my own breath. I'd given this company 15 years, and they had erased me in 15 seconds. For a moment, grief pressed against my ribs, sharp and mean. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them see what they'd done. But then something steadier took hold, a strange, calm focus that I hadn't felt in years. I opened my laptop, pulled up my last maintenance console, and typed one quiet command. It wasn't revenge. It was confirmation. A final act of care for a system I'd once loved. The line blinked once, green, then faded. The command was simple: verify safety protocol. I closed the lid. It was done. Outside, a bird sang somewhere in the distance, cheerful and indifferent. I stood, gathered my things, and felt the weight of finality settle around me. My badge lay on the desk, face up. The photograph faded around the edges. I slipped it into a drawer and walked away without looking back. On my way out, I passed the younger team gathered near the break room. Their laughter stopped when they saw me. One of them, a boy who still wore his college hoodie, whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the metal door. I looked tired but not broken. Maybe that's what they never understood. How resilience doesn't announce itself. It waits, it watches, it remembers. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, clearer somehow. The company I'd built was still standing behind me, but for the first time, I realized it no longer owned me. I got in my car and sat there, hands on the wheel, listening to the hum of the engine. Part of me wanted to drive straight home and forget it all, but another part, quieter, older, wiser, knew this wasn't the end of the story. Somewhere inside that building, a system was still running, and it knew my name. It knew my fingerprint, my rhythm, my signature. It knew who had kept it alive all these years. And when they finally tried to run it without me, it would remember what I taught it first. Never trust hands that don't know your heartbeat. At first, everything seemed normal. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, poured coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used for years, and told myself I was fine. Old habits die hard, and mine was checking the company dashboard before breakfast. I opened my laptop, out of instinct more than curiosity, but the access was already revoked. My account no longer existed. I stared at the message on the screen, "User not recognized," and felt the tiniest sting in my chest. Not pain, exactly. More like confirmation. They had erased me faster than I thought they would. So I closed the laptop and decided not to care. I spent the day walking aimlessly through the park, ignoring the temptation to check my phone. The world looked strange when you weren't rushing to keep it from falling apart. By evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a friend still at Helix. "System acting weird. You online?" I ignored it. Another came an hour later. "Deploy froze. Mark's losing it." I almost smiled, not out of cruelty, but in disbelief at how fast chaos finds the unprepared. By midnight, a third message appeared. "Everything's locked. No one can push anything." I set the phone face down on the table and let silence fill the room. The faint hum of my refrigerator sounded steadier than the voices in my head. I tried to picture them in the office. Mark pacing, HR whispering, younger staff typing frantically, hoping it wasn't their fault. I could imagine the smell of stale coffee and panic. That's the thing about building something for years. You can feel its heartbeat even from miles away. It doesn't need code or screens. You just know. Around dawn, I gave in and opened my phone again. The messages had multiplied. Screenshots of error messages, photos of people holding their heads in their hands, a flood of, "Can you please tell us what's happening?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to. What was happening was simple. The system was doing what it was meant to do, protect itself from reckless hands. The failsafe had activated after 72 hours without my verification. Everything had paused, waiting for a heartbeat that would never come. It wasn't destruction. It was defense. But of course they wouldn't see it that way. People like Mark never do. They think control means ownership, and when the machine stops listening, they call it betrayal. Around noon, I sat by the window eating toast, watching a group of kids play catch on the sidewalk. Their laughter felt like another world. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. Mark's voice came through, sharp but cracking at the edges. "Susan, listen. I don't know what's going on, but we need your help. The system's locked. Clients are calling. Can we just talk?" I let the message end without deleting it. Then I turned the phone over again and closed my eyes. A single thought crossed my mind, quiet and clear. This is what happens when you build something you don't understand. Still, the guilt surprised me. I didn't want them ruined. Not really. I wanted them to learn, but learning has a price, and they were finally paying it. By late afternoon, the tech blogs had caught wind of it. Headlines popped up. Helix outage cripples client operations. Major data freeze raises questions about leadership. And under each article, familiar words appeared. Sources say the issue began after senior engineer Susan Lang's departure. I read my name out loud and felt nothing. Not pride, not regret. Just peace. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Actions meet their weight eventually. That night, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of red wine, the city lights flickering below, I thought about all the years I'd spent saving that company from its own mistakes. I'd warned them. I'd trained them. I'd given them every chance. Now they would finally see what happens when you take away the foundation and expect the house to stand. I finished my wine, leaned back, and whispered into the night, "Let it learn." By Monday morning, Helix Analytics was front-page news for all the wrong reasons. The headlines used words like catastrophic, mysterious, and unprecedented. But I knew it wasn't any of those things. It was simply predictable. Systems built without understanding always collapse under pressure. I imagined Mark standing in the glass conference room, tie loosened, eyes darting across screens that refused to obey. The board must have been there too, stiff-faced and whispering questions he couldn't answer. Maybe one of them even said my name. The thought should have satisfied me, but instead, it made my stomach twist. I hadn't wanted this much noise. I only wanted to be free. That night, as rain tapped against my windows, I finally listened to the second voicemail from Mark. His voice had changed. The arrogance was gone. "Susan, please," he said quietly, "we just need to understand what you did. People are losing their jobs. Clients are furious. Help us fix this." For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered that meeting, the smirk, the words, "Make sure she doesn't touch production again." He didn't deserve pity. He deserved the mirror of his own choices. Somewhere inside that company, someone was probably reading an old memo of mine, trying to trace the design back to its source. Maybe they finally realized what they'd deleted when they deleted me. I turned off my phone and let the rain drown out the rest. The next morning, a friend from legal sent a message. Board meeting leaked. They're investigating leadership. You might want to see this. I hesitated before opening the link. On the screen, a short video played from a blurry recording of the meeting. A director leaned forward, eyes cold, and said, "Who exactly approved removing her?" Silence. Mark looked small in his chair, tugging at his sleeves. Another voice said, "You mean the woman whose system now refuses to let us deploy anything?" Then a pause, the kind that tightens the air. Someone whispered, "So she built the lock and the key?" The legal counsel replied, "Technically, she built the protection. You disabled the key." The room stayed silent after that. Even through the screen, I could feel the tension, the realization crawling across every face like dawn, breaking in slow motion. The camera panned slightly, showing the company's logo behind them, bright and hollow. I closed the video and sat back, my pulse strangely steady. It wasn't victory I felt, not even vindication. It was recognition. For once, the truth wasn't hiding behind someone else's words. It was standing there in plain sight, undeniable. Later that afternoon, the company issued a public statement filled with vague phrases about unexpected infrastructure complications and ongoing internal review. I didn't bother reading the rest. The market didn't wait for explanations. Their stock dropped again before the end of the day. Somewhere, I imagined the board signing Mark's exit papers. Somewhere, the same HR rep who had read my termination line was typing his. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The system had done what it was built to do, protect itself from harm. I had just never expected it would protect me too. As dusk fell, the storm outside quieted. The sky turned the color of ash, soft and final. I sat in that silence, knowing something had shifted forever. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath. The system could sleep now. So could I. But I knew this story wasn't ending here. What begins as collapse often becomes creation, and I could already feel something new stirring in the space they'd left behind. Weeks passed before the noise faded. My name stopped showing up in articles and Helix slipped quietly out of the headlines. The world moved on, as it always does. But I didn't. I spent my mornings in a small cafe by the river, reading the paper and watching the water move, steady, patient, unbothered. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window and hardly recognized her, the woman who used to measure her worth by deadlines and crisis calls. One afternoon, an email arrived from a company I'd never heard of. A young founder wrote, "We heard what happened. We don't want your system. We want your mind." I read it twice, smiled softly, and closed it. For the first time in years, I wanted to choose carefully where my work would live. A few days later, I met with an old colleague, someone who had left long before me. Over black coffee and rain tapping the glass, he asked, "Do you ever miss it?" I thought for a long moment before answering. I miss the building, not the noise. He nodded, understanding without words. I started helping small teams again, quietly, off the radar. No big launches, no press, just people who cared about what they built. It felt like breathing again. One evening, while reviewing a simple project for a nonprofit, I saw a line of code written by a new developer. At the top, they had typed a note, "Inspired by Susan Lang." My hand paused over the mouse, and for a second, the world went still. That was it, the real reward. Not the collapse of a company, but the continuation of care. I leaned back, watching, the screen glow softly in the dim light, and whispered, "That's the legacy." Outside, the rain began again, slow and rhythmic, washing the city clean. I closed the laptop and felt something quiet, but certain settle in my chest. The work would go on. It always does, in the hands of those who remember why they started. And as I turned off the light, I realized the story hadn't ended with being fired. It had only started the moment I stopped needing permission to matter. What I learned still echoes in quiet moments. Power doesn't always come from control or titles. It often comes from patience, from knowing exactly when to let silence speak. When Helix fell apart after I left, people called it poetic justice. But I don't see it that way. I see a reminder that arrogance is loud, but competence is quiet. And quiet always lasts longer. I spent years documenting every process, every decision, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew how easily people forget the hands that built their success. They called it overcautious. I called it memory. That record-keeping, that preparation, became my protection when the noise finally turned on me. The truth is, hidden strength rarely looks heroic. It looks like staying late when no one notices. It looks like saving receipts, keeping notes, writing things down even when people roll their eyes. It's unglamorous, but it's real. And when chaos finally hits, it's the quiet ones, the ones who kept track, who stayed steady, who survive it. My advice? Don't waste energy proving your worth to people who depend on your silence to stay powerful. Document everything, but more importantly, know when to walk away and let your work speak for itself. The lesson cost me years of exhaustion and a kind of faith I'll never get back. But it gave me clarity. Real security doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being prepared. How to get started today. Keep written proof of your contributions, every plan, idea, or fix. Build systems that can defend themselves when you're gone. Protect your calm as fiercely as you protect your job. Learn to say less when others talk too much. Walk away with your evidence, not your anger. Have you ever been underestimated until the moment your absence spoke louder than you could?